Great. So yeah, good to see you all coming in. Okay, so what am I going to do this week? Well, I'm sure I was going to do fold over elastic, and I still will, but I decided that it's this time of year, everybody's making napkins. So I thought we'd have a look at the stitches and a look at the shapes, because sometimes napkins are square, sometimes they're round. So we'll deal with all the things like that. And we'll deal with decorative threads, because if I'm going to hem a napkin, the fastest way to do it is to use a decorative thread. Now I could, you know, use a hammer and do it that way, but to be honest, the fastest, quickest way is to put a decorative thread on the edge using my serger. So that is what I would do. So let me first of all talk about thread, because I still think some people need help with thread. So we have on the serger the ability to use much heavier thread than we can use on a sewing machine, and that's one of the things I love about it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm always going to use the heavy threads. So I do have lots of 8-weight thread, and I use my 8-weight thread for all my decorative stuff. It's probably my favorite thread. And let me show you this Christmas quilt, which is a teachable lesson, but there's loads of thread used on there, and the majority of it is my really heavy thread because I want it to stand out. But do I think really heavy thread's good on napkins? Possibly not. Okay, but that doesn't mean you can't use it. I'm just saying that I would probably use a lighter thread. So a lighter thread would be a 12-weight. So what I'm going to do is just show you some 12 weights, and I'm just thinking of the best way to do it. Don't have the best light on my table, which is annoying, but let me just move it over and we'll see. Let me see if I can put another light on. Yep, I think that helped a bit. Right, okay, so here are my decorative threads, and I'm going to show you. I'm just getting them. Whoops. Right. So here are my decorative threads, and you can see they're all in a pile. But these are some of the 12 weights, and as I said, this is an 8-weight, and I do like 8-weight. Let me show you what an 8-weight can do. An 8-weight gives you a bigger, glossier stitch, so super duper, but perhaps not a napkin. So here we have a placemat, and this is the kind of time when I would use this heavier thread. In fact, I use this exact thread, and then I used a light green in the lower looper that gives me that kind of beading stitch. And I like these variegators because they have very short blocks of color. But this is stabilized. It's actually got bozel in it, so it kind of copes with that heavier thread a bit better. It's not to say you can't use it. I'm just saying, think, do I need to use the heavier thread? So that's the 8-weight, and I have dazzle and razzle, and I have eleganza, which is a cotton weight. Here we go, and they do it in the tastiest colors. I love this color. I just saw a plate. I drew around the plate. So this is eleganza, and I would use this on a napkin because it is actually a bit finer than the dazzle and razzle. And even though it's an 8-weight, it is lighter. So I would certainly consider using this on a napkin. Plus it's a cotton. So that kind of makes sense because you're probably sewing a cotton napkin. So that is the eleganza, and it's an 8-weight. But it's like I always tell you, just because it says it's 8-weight doesn't mean it really is. It's kind of lighter. And here I have another thread here that I think this was a Madeira Decora thread. And again, a nice heavy thread, perhaps better for a placemat than a napkin. So I've covered my view on that one. So what are the 12-weight threads? Well, the 12-weight threads, these two are cotton, okay? You've got the variegated, which is fruity, and you have the solid, which is spaghetti. And they're 12 weights, and they're super, super easy to use. If you've never used a decorative thread, you'll have no problem using the 12 weights. They're only a little bit heavier, but they do give you a more substantial stitch. And they also come in glamour, which is it's a rayon thread with a metallic, so it's nice and shiny, and I'll show you that in a minute, stitched up. And then they also have it in a rayon. Well, would I use a rayon? Yes, because a rayon is shinier than a cotton. So for something like Christmas napkins, a shiny might be what you're looking for. So let me show you some things stitched out in it so you can have a look, and that will help you to decide. So let me see what I do with them. Here they are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all the stitches. Now this is I've used the O1 needle, so I've made a wide stitch, and there's a reason why I did it. I did it because this is actually a Christmas tree. I know that's hard to believe. Let me show you the Christmas tree. I have got one here. So this is the Christmas tree. And I wanted that real thick band of color on the edge of this napkin. But a wide stitch, again, would I always use a wide stitch? Probably not in the main, but I did for this because it is a Christmas tree. And I did these last year, and I put them on my table for Christmas. And let me show you inside. It's actually a skewer, a kebab stick, and it's got a trunk and a star. So if you're interested in that, I'll let you know where you can find that live that did that last year. So I did use a wide stitch, and I actually used the glamour on both the red and the gold, and I could have had either side, the right side. So that is a 3-thread overlock, and it was a wide, although not a very wide. I narrowed the stitch. So that is the wide stitch. Now and as I said, I did it on this one here. And the reasons I'm not so keen on the wide is just that they're a little bit harder to sew. They're a little bit harder to join sometimes. And maybe I didn't want to use that much thread. But this is probably one of my favorite stitches for napkins. Can you see it is, let me hold it up. It may take a minute to focus. It is turquoise on one side and orange on the other, this one, because it matches this fabric. And I've used the 12 weight, and I've used accent in these, and I think it's really pretty, and it's just an easier stitch to work with. So for something like a circle, it would be my preferred choice. But what I also like about it is it's very flat on the edge, and it's not thick. Okay, it's very flat on the edge. And then this is another finish that I really, really like, and this is the rolled edge. And you can see it's nice and smooth, and it's quick, and it's easy, and it's well behaved. And again, another stitch that makes a great finish for napkins. So let's just talk about, I'm going to bring you back to me rather than show you more. So let's talk about the 3-thread wide. So I used, actually, no, I'm not going to talk about that because I actually didn't discuss it in my notes. But if you go to that, if you want to do that Christmas tree, let me tell you that that was Facebook Live number 58. And to get to that, all you have to do is you are on my public page. And if you look under videos, you'll see all my past lives. And if you want to do that Christmas tree, it's number 58. And it will tell you which one that is. And I think it says Christmas trees. So that's a good clue. And that tells you how to do the wider stitch. So I'm just concentrating on the narrow because I think that's your best choice in the main. So for my 3-thread overlock narrow, which was my orange and blue, okay, very much a great stitch. When you're looking at this side, you see how it's orange, but you just see that beading stitch of blue. I've put the settings in the files in my group, Deb Canham Serger Sanity Projects. I will quickly tell you that it's just a regular 3-thread narrow. The only difference is that I have altered my stitch length. When you're using decorative thread, you're going to need to alter your stitch length. Okay, if you have tensions on your needles, you may also have to change those. If you're using the Babylock automatic tensions, then all you're going to have to do is lengthen your stitch length. Otherwise, the stitches end up on top of each other, and then it gets ugly. So yep. And also, one more thing, when you're stitching on the edge, don't forget you have differential feed. Now, this is going to confuse everybody, but sometimes I put my differential feed up and sometimes I put it down. And it really, I think, just depends on the fabric you're sewing and what shape you're sewing. Okay, so if you're sewing a circle, it's going to stretch much more easily because you're stitching on the bias. So you're probably going to put your stitch up. If you're sewing with a rolled hem on a straight edge, there's always a chance your stitch might not look as good as it could, in which case I would put it down to 0.8. I always have to check that one. Right, so that was 3 thread overlock narrow. I am going to stitch for you because it's just no fun unless I can demo and make a mess of it. So yep, the next stitch I want to talk about is the 3 thread overlock narrow hem, okay? And it's very, very similar. It's almost identical. The only difference is it turns a very tiny hem. And it may be you don't want that. If you're using the 8 thread, the heavier weight thread, you may not want quite so much weight on the outer edge of your napkin. There and again, you might be using a fabric where it suits it. So just be aware, the only difference between the one I showed you and the 3 thread overlock narrow hem is there is a tiny hem underneath, which could work to your advantage or not, depending. Just to be aware of it. And again, as I said, if it starts getting wavy, you're going to put your differential feed up to 1.3. If your stitch isn't perfect, you can certainly try that, or you might move it down to 0.8. I do tend to, these days, find that I can't be so precise as to whether I should go up or down when I'm working with decorative threads on the edge of fabric. Just be aware you have options. So the last one is the rolled hem. And the rolled hem, again, using decorative thread, you want to make sure you're not stitching on top of every stitch. Okay, so make sure there's some room, so lengthen your stitch. Now, in the case of rolled hem, you only want decorative thread in the upper looper. It's never going to show anywhere else, and you're just wasting money. Okay, so I like the metallics for it, and I like the variegated. Okay, I like the variegated edges, and you'll see it looks just the same on that side as it does that side. So a nice finish. This will also turn under a narrow hem, okay? So be aware of that. So how do we finish the edges? You know, it's like if I'm using a wide stitch, I have no problem taking the thread tail and burying it under the lower looper stitches. And the same could be said for a narrow hem. I can certainly do that on my 3 thread overlock narrow. It may be that my thread chain's a little bit thick. I can always undo it and put the individual pieces behind it. But equally, I could also put fray check on it or fray block and cut it, and that will be the end of it. If you're going to do that, I recommend you take it to the iron and press it dry and then cut it, because it just ends up softer. Okay. So the only stitch I hadn't mentioned for you baby lock people, hi Pauline, all the way from Australia. The only stitch I haven't mentioned for you baby lock people is wave stitch. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the best stitch for a napkin because it's very stiff. But if I couldn't resist using it, then I would definitely use something like a 12 weight at the most. I would never use an 8 weight, it would just be too heavy. Or I could consider using a woolly nylon. So I haven't covered wave stitch because I don't think it's your best bet. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. I just don't think it would be my choice. Okay, so lastly, let's consider the shape because there's a lot of things to it. So if I'm working on rectangles, and I have done, you have to be imaginative. This is my napkin. So here's number 1 napkin, and this was a rectangle. And you could see that I just sewed along here, and then I put this edge right up to the needles, the raw edge against the knife, sewed down here, and did the same on the other two sides. And you can see I have 4 thread chains, okay? And that's totally acceptable to me. I'm quite happy to put fray check on, press it, and cut those off. But you can also do it where you go round the corners, okay? So this one, I went round the corners, and there's my thread chain. I just have the 1 thread chain. So that's kind of neat. Now let me tell you that I'm only brave enough to do this on a rolled hem. My view of going around corners is it's great, but you can sometimes have a loose stitch on the end. Now you could put fray check on it and cut it off, but I think it's easier to do with a rolled hem than it is with any other stitch. So I'm going to demo that to you. And of course, I could have got rid of the whole problem by curving my corners so that I went all the way around in a curve. Or I could sew a circle, which I quite often sew circle napkins. So do I have any stitches before I demo? Which is better, fray check or fray block? I prefer fray block. I think generally it's considered better. But you know, the other one does the work. I like regular glue too, but remember a lot of the fabric glues wash off. So there's a consideration. Right, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on... Do I have any questions, Richard? Sorry, I didn't ask you.
Just the free check or free block one, that's all.
Yeah. So here I've worked on a napkin. Oh, you know, the one thing I didn't mention, and I want to go back to it because I overlooked it, was when you do a rolled edge, it turns up a little hem, okay? So I wanted to just say, let's all think about the times when it may not be your best choice. Now, you know, my attitude is give it a go and see if it works. I'm just looking, I wrote down a list of things. You know, my advice is give it a go and see if it works for you. But these are the times when I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't use it if I had bosal in there or it was a quilt block with flannel. I wouldn't use a rolled hem because it's not actually capable of turning over that much thickness. Okay, so that would be a time I wouldn't use it. I might think twice about using it on a double napkin. And I thought I had one, but I can't see it. You know, where you've got 2 pieces of fabric, it just may be too thick. You know, it would be my preferred choice on a single piece of fabric. And that's what I've done here. Okay. And you can see it's come out nicely. Now you have options. I generally cut my circle and put it against the knife, but I think that's perhaps a little bit harder. So what I've done is I have drawn round a plate. This isn't really a napkin because it wouldn't cover anything, but I drew around a plate to get a circle, and I'm just going to go to the machine and stitch it. So I'm going to...
Is that a dinner plate or a side plate?
It's a side plate. Right, I'm just going to move you, sorry. Okay, so here we are, and I am hopefully set up for rolled hem. I've actually got my differential feed on 0.8, and I'm going to change that because I'm sewing on a biased edge, and I'm pretty sure that would stretch me out. Now, on the baby locks, I've got my stitch. I'm going to have my stitch width on 3.5. I'm going to have my stitch length on the R numbers. Remember, this is a rolled hem, so you have to get rid of that stitch finger. So I have it on the rolled R numbers. That will remove my stitch finger. And I have my automatic stitch selector on the baby locks on D, okay, which is going to give me a rolled hem. And I've marked it on the top because I want to sew from the top. Okay, let me just try and get a bit more in. Right, I might not sew all the way around because I'm just going around a circle, but there and again I might.
Someone says, please explain the difference in rolled hem and rolled edge.
I don't think there is one. I get confused with that too. Right, so I am set up. Somebody said, what's the difference between rolled edge and rolled hem? I think it's just the way we word it. You know, I think it's the same thing. We have narrow hem, but we have rolled edge and rolled hem. It's rolled. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my notch onto this line, and I've marked it from the top because it'd be no good marking it from the bottom because I wouldn't be able to see it. And I'm going to run my line notch on my foot where my O2 needle is along that line. And what you're going to see is that, well, yes, it's cutting, but I think what you'll also see is I get some tension build up because I'm going round a circle. So every so often I will lift my foot and release it. And I find that's all I really have to do. And if you use the knee lift, you can do that really easily. I can't use the knee lift, it just doesn't register. And as far as my stitch goes, it's coming out nicely, so I'm not going to make any changes. But if I didn't like it, if the stitches were a bit far apart, I would actually, if they were irregularly far apart, in other words, if there were gaps in the stitches, then I would change my differential feed. If there was big gaps in all the stitches, then I would make my stitch length shorter. Now, as I said, you could cut this circle and run it against the edge of the knife. I think for most people this might be the easier method. And also it saved me cutting out the circle. I just had to draw around on a piece of square fabric and the machine's cutting the circle, so I saved a job. Right, I'm going to come round and I am going to meet up with my first stitching. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch over it. And I'm going to stitch over on this line. So this piece is all going to get cut off. And when I get my needle to about there, I'm going to turn off. Okay, I'm going to drive off the road. Okay, so I'm coming up to it. This is one of the few times when I'm going to tell you watch the needle. Okay, I've reached my stitching and I'm just going to turn off. And there you are. There's my join. It could have been better. It could have been worse, you know. It's maybe if I'd gone a few more stitches and cut off a bit more, it would have been better. But once that's pressed, it will look really nice. It's not stretched. And in fact, I had this one on normal, and this fabric is quite heavy. So, you know, if I thought it was going to stretch or it was stretching, I'd have put it up to 1.3. I'd have certainly put it up to 1.3 with a lighter weight cotton. Okay, so let's look at the rectangle. Now, I have a smaller piece of fabric for the rectangle, which I have, of course, lost.
Someone says here,
Go on.
hang on, how big of a circle for a nice sized napkin? So I suppose a dinner plate size, really.
Yeah, I think bigger than that. I think 18 inch. And if you've ever seen me use the sew table with the hole in it, again, that is a that is another Facebook Live. I think it might be covered in the one about the Christmas trees because I think I used it. Yes, I did. You could use your Sew Steady table with your pin attachment, and then you can just whiz round, okay? So, as I said, that Facebook Live, Richard, could you type it in?
What?
It was Facebook Live number 58.
Oh, gosh. I can't find
Right.
it on your silly keyboard.
He can't find the numbers. Facebook Live 58, if somebody will type it in. And I can't find my small piece of fabric, so I'm going to have to use my big one. Right, so this is my piece of fabric, and what I want to do is I'm going to sew two corners where I'm going to go straight off, and then I'm going to sew one where I go straight across because that's kind of easy and anybody can do it. So what I want to do is I've marked it on the top where I'm going to cut it, and I am going to
FB Live 57, you say?
no, did I say? I can't remember what I said. 58. 58. Right, so I'm going to put that line right under that O2 needle notch because that's where I want it to cut. And another thing that I didn't do, and I should have said to you, is whenever you stitch with these chains hanging out the back, pull them out because they can jump back in and get caught in your stitching. So hold on to them as you start. Right, so I'm just, this is one way of doing it. You could just sew on all 4 sides, come off, and fray check. Now that said, if I was going to sew this corner, I wouldn't start here with the knife because you know what's going to happen? It's going to distort that corner, okay? Can't do that. I can't just lift it and put it under the knife and hope for the best. It will ruin the corner. So what I have to do is I have to chop off my seam allowance on that first part. And why is that? Because then I can put it all the way up to the needle, raw edge against the knife, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand turn it so that I know I'm into the fabric and just stitch on. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me a nice corner. I'm going to hold that thread chain I just told you to do. I'm going to give me a nice corner. Now this time round I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to sew around the corner. Okay, so watch carefully. I'm going to stitch to the end, ignore my blue lines. I'm going to stitch to the end and I'm going to stitch 1 stitch off the end. Then I'm going to lift my foot, I'm going to lift my needle, and the problem is I can't just flip this round because the last stitch or 2 is sitting on the stitch finger. Okay, now do you remember the stitch finger is there and it's where the machine lays down the stitch before it goes on the fabric? So I'm going to get hold of my piece of fabric and pull back, and that's going to release my stitch from the stitch finger. And then what I need to do is exactly what I did before. I need to put my foot down. Now I'm always a little bit wary of doing this because you sometimes get a loop in the stitch, okay? But I think it's less likely with rolled edge or rolled hem than it is, say, with a wider stitch or with, you know, 3-thread narrow or something like that. Right, so coming up to this end again, and I'm stitching just 1 stitch off, okay? I can't just turn it because I've got stitches on that stitch finger. So I'm going to lift my foot, lift my needle, pull back, release it from the stitch finger, put the raw edge against the knife, and I am going to, I've turned my needle and actually I've just missed the very edge. So I'm just going to lift it, put it back a fraction, and I've got it now. And then I'm just going to sew on. Coming up here, it's going to chop off. Now you will see possibly the blue lines because, oh, you may not. I didn't chop them off. Right. So there's my corners, okay? And they're pretty good, you know? They're not bad. See, can you see that stitch? I got the stitch there. Now, if that really offended me, it doesn't offend me, then I could put some fray check on and cut that. But you'll see this one, I've still got a tiny stitch there. And you know, I think it's really hard not to get a fraction of a stitch. Sometimes I try and pull it back on the thread, but I think that defeats the object if you start fiddling. And then these other corners, I just sewed off and on. They're nice and square. My fabric stayed flat. And I think that is about it. Let's have a look and see if we've got any questions.
Is that 1 piece of fabric, someone says?
Is that 1 piece of fabric? Yes, that was 1 piece of fabric. You know, it's like I said to you, I'm a little bit more hesitant to use a double fabric, you know, where it's right side and right side, to do a rolled hem. I would more likely use the narrow hem on that one because it has that nice flat finish. And you know, whenever you're going to turn a hem, it's going to add bulk to it. So, somebody said it looks perfect to me. Yeah, but, you know, perfect is finished. Okay, you all know my view on that one. It's finished. I could do napkins. So now's a good time to buy your Thanksgiving fabric and make some napkins. And it won't take long, so you've got time to do it. So any more questions on that? And I gave you the Facebook thing for the Christmas tree ones. I put on my table last year, and I don't think they really noticed, but I might try again this year. Okay, I want to tell you that I have done something different. Do you starch before hemming? No, I didn't. I didn't. There's no harm in starching before hemming. Just why take one more step if it will go without it? But you know something? I can sit and show you things, but you still need to have that mentality that, oh, I'll try it out for me, I'll try out with an 8-weight thread, or oh, I really want to use a waisted. Do it. Don't be influenced by me. Deb, sorry, but could you repeat where the woolly nylon is in the rolled hem? Is it the upper or lower looper? When you're doing a rolled hem, the only place the thread needs to go is in the upper looper, because that's the only thread that ever shows, okay? It's the only thread that shows, because on a rolled, it goes from the front all the way around the back to the back stitch. So it would be a waste of money to put anything else in there but just your decorative thread in the upper looper, okay? And that's what I've got in here. This was a rolled edge. And that's another consideration. If somebody says to you, can you finish 12 napkins for me, then you don't want to be paying out lots of money for decorative thread. Just do a rolled edge. They'll still have a pretty finish, so, and still charge them, okay? Do you have time to go over the use of the differential feed for these napkins, just to keep the stitches from piling up and to prevent bias stretching? Sure, I will. This is my view on the differential feed, that it has several uses. One is, yes, it stops things from stretching. Two, sometimes stitches need stretching out. And thirdly, sometimes the stitch isn't perfect, but if you use your differential feed and just experiment, you may find it helps. Now, I did something earlier today, and I had that problem, and I'm just looking for it. You know how it goes. I don't know where it is. But, oh, yeah, maybe it's here. No, I did that with you. I did a circle, and when I first started off, I noticed that the stitches were a little bit irregular. And I forget which thread I was using. So even though I was working on the bias, I actually did put my differential feed down on that particular one to 0.8. It was a different fabric. And it made my stitches neater. So you have two reasons to use it. One is if you have gathers, if it looks like this, it is really wavy. Do you see that? It's really, really, really wavy. And that's partly the effect I wanted, because it was the Christmas tree garland thing. This is the Christmas tree section. And it was a wider stitch. Now, if I had moved my see how wavy it is. If I had moved my differential feed down, or up to 1.3, it would have compensated for the stretch. Don't forget, this is a heavy stitch. It's a wide stitch on the edge of cotton, double cotton actually, but it's still likely to stretch the edge. So I moved it up to one. I would have moved it up to 1.3 if it wasn't for the fact that I actually didn't mind it wavy, because I was making this Christmas tree napkin. Okay, so you're going to move it up if it's wavy, and if you feel, and I sometimes feel that rolled edge particularly can gather up your fabric a little bit. So I will sometimes move that down to 0.8 or even 0.6. But it's a question of experimenting. Okay, I think that is about it. I've got something different this week, because I always like to give you something. Let me just grab it. This is my triangular purse class. Yeah, I've got it. Triangular purse class, and it isn't one that people easily find, because it is on my online Serger school, which is Deb Canham Teachable, and it's the triangular purse. And if you use coupon code FL, that's an L, okay, but it's lowercase, FL95, you will get 20% off it. So it will take it down to $20. And it's how to make this triangular purse. And it includes some decorative stitching as well, okay? So a fun sew, you will need a cording foot and you will make the flower. Okay, using rolled hem, so you've just done that. But rather than give you the title, if you just put Deb Canham Teachable Triangular Purse in Google, it will come up, okay? And I will put a link in at the end of this. No, it's difficult to do now. I should have done it at the beginning. Okay. But that's a fun sew and it's 20% off. It's normally 25, so it's 20. And it is just a good Christmas present, okay? And people have done such cute fabric mixes, lots of different fabrics to use in that because it's all multicolored stripes. So do I have any more questions? I'm just checking. Yeah.
I want to take this class, someone says.
If you did this on a knit and stretched it, would that give you a lettuce hem? Yes, it would. Okay, lettuce hem comes from stretching. So you would put your differential feed down to 0.6. You probably have to pull as well because it wouldn't be enough on most fabrics to make it. And in most of the time when you do a lettuce hem, it's actually easier to sew it and then stretch it, okay? And it makes it a bit more even, I think, too.
So happy Thanksgiving.